Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are in the world. My name is Katherine Yang, and I'm super excited for our webinar today coming from Cisco Duo. We'll be covering, per the abstract, 3 identity trends that we want to keep top of mind, and we'll also be dropping a little bit of a teaser on what we are thinking about and talking about at Cisco that may be coming to y'all at Identiverse. So, part of my webinar philosophy is I like to keep things engaging, and I like to make sure that there are real people watching us and not robots. So I love running a poll at the beginning of my webinars, and I've got an opening poll question for y'all. Which type of identity attacks saw the highest frequency in 2024? And I'm going to start opening the poll now, so feel free to get your answers in there. So that graph you saw earlier was from a new report that was released by Cisco Talos, which is our security intelligence and research group. At Talos, they focus on identifying and mitigating these cybersecurity threats, threat intelligence, research and development on defensive tech, and they also offer incident response teams and services. So the results of this year in review report that was actually just released in March 31st, so very, very recently, showed us a lot of new insights on some of the incidents that they were dealing with. All right, I'm seeing some of the responses coming in. I'll give it maybe 10 more seconds before revealing that. All right, so I guess we can see some of the results here. It looks like phishing, valid accounts seem to be the best guesses for the top attack vectors in 2024. And to reveal to you guys the statistics, Talos Intelligence saw that the most common tactic in these identity attacks were valid accounts, which is where adversaries obtained and abused the credentials of these existing accounts in order to carry out the different phases of their operations. And if you guys answered phishing, that's also pretty in line because a lot of the result of phishing is in the obtaining valid accounts. And then aside from that, OS credential dumping was also a pretty common thing that was detected. And in general, they said a lot of these attacks leveraged legitimate authentication processes, which made it more challenging to detect at the network perimeter, which brings us to the idea of identity as a perimeter. And everyone's been talking about that. It's Identiverse, so y'all already know this. But I wanted, super excited to have with us today Matt Caulfield, who is our VP of Product for Duo and Identity at Cisco. He leads Cisco's product strategy and thought leadership in all things identity. But I don't want to steal your intro. So Matt, I would love to hear a quick, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you, what brought you to security, cybersecurity, and why identity security specifically?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. Happy to be here and welcome everybody who's tuning in. Pretty exciting, leading up to Identiverse. So what brought me into security? So first of all, I run the Duo and identity business at Cisco. We talk to all kinds of customers, both small and large, public institutions, private institutions, about identity security. I got into this whole thing a few years ago now. I'm a boomerang at Cisco, so I've been here previously and worked on all kinds of things around like networking and virtual networking. It's really hard not to bump into security when you're in that kind of infrastructure domain. But what really got me into the topics of identity security is I was the founder and CEO of a company called ORT, which was one of the early pioneers in identity threat detection and response. And so we started that company in 2019, realizing that there was a big trend upwards in the number of successful identity attacks, where attackers were no longer going after the front door of the enterprise, and they were no longer going after malware and zero-day exploits or things like this. They were just kind of walking in using credentials. And so we built ORT as an identity threat detection and response company, grew it to a bunch of customers and a great technology behind it, and were eventually acquired by Cisco in 2023. And so that's really how I came to join the Cisco security team in particular. And the reason why we focus on identity security is because after talking to hundreds of chief security officers, that was the thing that was top of mind that they were most worried about at that time. And it's only gotten worse since then. So it's still top of mind.
Yeah, awesome. I always like hearing the story of like how you found the challenges in identity security, and that's what led you to building OR and like some of the data needs. And I also think it's cool that I'm also a Duo OG, and I came in kind of with the acquisition as well, and just to see that all of these different identity security technologies are coming together at Cisco, I think that the possibilities are really exciting. And so for everyone who's attending today, I do have a few questions lined up throughout this presentation for Matt, but if you guys have questions of your own, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Hopefully we'll have time at the end to address some of those. But otherwise, you could find us at the booth in Identiverse too. Okay, enough of the product pitch. And Matt, I'm super excited to dive into some of the data that we've gotten recently. So going back to that Talos report, we can clearly see that the subject of identity security is much more relevant or more relevant than ever with the attacks on identity dominating the 2024 threat landscape. We saw that 60% or over half of the Talos IR cases had some sort of identity attack component in 2024. And we also know that ransomware has been a very top concern or a high priority for a lot of teams. And in this year, ransomware actors overwhelmingly leveraged these valid accounts for initial access. They also targeted certain industries a bit more than often. So, for example, education or financial sectors. And this is all, these aren't new trends. They're things that we've been seeing year over year. And also, we saw that on some of these identity attacks, they were difficult to prevent and harder for IT teams to detect when a lot of the reported incidents were going unnoticed for months. And that kind of brings us to the premise of our three trends here, what we'll be talking about today, which is, those are statistics, which is some challenges that we've been seeing in securing that identity perimeter, where we are seeing, gaps in protection, perhaps like sufficient MFA coverage, weaker forms of MFA, or limited device trust. And then another area that we're seeing some challenges in is in visibility itself. Like we're noticing that identity infrastructure is sprawling. It's getting much more complex. You have all these different sources. There's on-premise, there's in the cloud, and there's multiple identity sources with no really single source of truth, which can lead to a lot of discrepancies. And one of the last challenges that we see, notice, and talk about is that kind of frustrating experience created as a result of a lot of disparate tools or the need for repeated authentications or like challenging policy implementations. And this frustrates not just end users but also administrators. And altogether, these three challenges, they're not new topics, but they're definitely still top of mind. So let's start with the first one, maybe in gaps in protection. And I would love to pick your brain a bit on what complete MFA coverage looks like, because when we think about attack headlines or threat headlines we see like in the news, oh, so-and-so is breached, or oh, there is this vulnerability. And oftentimes it's interesting because we see they're like, oh, there's no MFA in the authentication, and that's how they got in. And we're like, how is that possible? MFA has been, we say it's been commoditized, like everyone should have it. It's very baseline. And what we've detected, or the outcome of why that MFA coverage isn't there, is because we see that environments kind of look a little bit like this, where for those domain joined, like owned managed devices, maybe there's like very strong level MFA, but for a majority of the other use cases, like remote access or like protecting your SaaS apps, and unmanaged devices, maybe there is some MFA, and maybe in some cases in the organization, there's no MFA, or like you don't know what that MFA coverage looks like for places like contractors and third parties. I know third-party supply chain risk is kind of a high priority as well. And it's really, we notice like these gaps where attackers are kind of targeting, because the truth of the matter is you're really only as strong as your weakest login. And if you've neglected these kind of key areas of authentication, you have no MFA per the need for higher coverage, this is probably where the attackers are going to target. And going back to the Talos report, which is, I have a lot of slides of Talos report because I think the numbers are really cool. But what was revealed in the year in review is that a lot of the targeted vulnerabilities and MFA weaknesses were attributed to like misconfigured systems. So whether that is no MFA, or maybe it's not fully deployed, or maybe we're missing some of those edge cases, like if your company's in like an M&A and you're inheriting some weaker forms of MFA, or you've got contractors, or like VPN, RDP, those legacy applications, that is really, that's where the gap is. And at Identiverse last year, we announced Cisco Identity Intelligence, or built off of your work at ORT. And we also talked a lot about the importance of ISPM and IDTR in today's like security world. So could you briefly explain to us, like, what is ISPM, what is IDTR, what do they stand for, and like what could they possibly look like in practice when it comes to achieving like a higher MFA coverage?
Yes. And yeah, you really only are as strong as kind of like your weakest login. So it's very catchy. You should use that. So ISPM and ITDR. ISPM, in case anybody listening doesn't know these acronyms, and I understand that there's a new acronym every month, it feels like. Identity Security Posture Management. ISPM is this idea that we need to be constantly trying to understand and analyze the identity attack surface that we're trying to protect. So for some organizations that are really big, they might have tens of thousands or even millions of identities between customers and partners and third parties and employees that they need to protect. The concept with identity security posture management is that we're examining every one of those identities and how it's been configured in terms of policy, in terms of what it's allowed to access, in terms of privilege level, and identifying the vulnerabilities in that attack surface. So which identities are the most likely to be attacked and to be attacked successfully? ISPM exists in order to answer that question. And then ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response, is kind of the other side of the coin. You think of Identity Security Posture Management, ISPM, as sort of proactive, right? We're proactively looking for vulnerable identities, and we're going to find ways to shore them up. Whereas with ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response, that's more reactive or real time, where we're looking at the instantaneous kind of login behaviors of each user and identifying anomalies based on how their account is set up. And these things are complementary, because to do ITDR, threat detection, really well, you also need to look at the policy and how the accounts are set up, and when was the last time somebody enrolled a new authentication factor or was added to a new application, because those are all little triggers that maybe build up, little signals, risk signals that can build up into something that actually looks like a threat. So that's what ISPM stands for. That's what ITDR stands for. And in practice, that really looks typically like analytics. It's really a big data, identity analytics, machine learning, AI problem where you want to ingest the information from the many different identity systems you might have in your environment. And nobody has just one. People have directories, they've got identity providers, SSO systems, identity governance systems. Pulling that all together to get you a single view so you can really wrap your arms around what are these identities that I'm trying to protect, which ones are vulnerable, and which ones might already be under attack or even compromised.
Yeah, I like how you said that ISPM and IDTR kind of work hand in hand together. There isn't one without the other. And all of that is really grounded in so much data and the need for a lot of data and the need to process it, especially we've been seeing like all these complicated identity environments, and not just like the sheer amount of data, but also how to process, the resources to process, and even like the human resources. Like how much time do we have to realistically get through all of these, like the new telemetry that we're able to collect? And you did mention AI, which segments really well into our next trend, actually, on the like realistic applications of artificial intelligence. We hear AI everywhere, like AI this, AI that, and in fact, like the Identity Defined Security Alliance (IDAS) recently shared some trends from 2024, and according to the report, like 96% of respondents said that they see AI or machine learning becoming beneficial in addressing their identity-related challenges. And 71% of them said that the number one use case is in identifying that outlier behavior, which is kind of what you described earlier. Like we need to be able to figure out a baseline and see the deviances from that. But before we dive into what we do at Cisco, can we level set a little bit? Like, can we start off? I want to hear from you. What do you think is in currently like an unrealistic application of AI, like right now in its current state in security?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer because just where things are at, it feels like anything can be solved with AI, and attackers have started leveraging it to like great effect. Right? They're able to
Mhm.
generate voices and video that looks and sounds like a real person and can trick other people. It could be employees to kind of give away their credentials or be more easily phished. And so there's lots of capabilities for attackers and defenders and IAM professionals that AI unlocks. I think some of the things that are unrealistic is if you've got bad data in your identity systems and the policies feeding them, aren't totally locked down. Like it's really hard if you have kind of garbage input to get beautiful output. So garbage in, garbage out. And so what we often find is that AI can help optimize these systems. AI can do things a lot faster than people can. But one of the things it can't do is fix like a broken architecture. So I think that's a big piece of it. And the other piece is there's a major human side to identity in terms of who needs access to what, based on what they need for their job and for privileges. And so if we start to do things like putting AI in place for identity governance, there are limitations to how much it can do before a human is needed in the loop. At the end of the day, you might always need a manager or somebody else to approve you getting access to like a production database or a production system, just because you can't really take an AI agent to court and hold them liable. So at least today, you would need somebody else on the line saying like, yes, this is an approved privilege that this person should have, either a manager or a peer, in order to check and code into a code base, or in order to access a system behind a firewall that might be super sensitive. So there's a few areas, but it feels like more often than not, AI has applicability to solving many of the challenges that we face as IAM professionals.
Yeah, and it does sound like although AI automation is really promising, there are still those nuances that are unique to each organization, and the processes, like like you said, who can use the code base, like who gets access to the data, and in this case, I think AI is not yet like a one size fits all, and so it'll be interesting to see where the tools do go. In developing that and making things more customizable. And also, you mentioned that AI, we hear a lot of threats about AI being used on the attacker side too, with like voice phishing and smishing and all of the, and, deep fake impressions. Luckily, and you'll have to read the Taos report for the exact number because I didn't copy it, but I do believe that there hasn't actually been a sharp uptick in a lot of these like super, super advanced AI leveraged attack methods. A lot of the times AI in the attack chain is still just being used to uh, not still it's still very dangerous, but to craft like more fluid sounding emails, and the things like up leveling the use of English language. We're not quite at the level of like vishing at scale, thank God. But that's a lot of hype for AI on both the attacker and the defender side. Now let's maybe get a little specific about like a realistic application. In a previous talk, you mentioned how AI can drive graphing algorithms in order to construct like an identity graph. And then at that stage, we like pull up this graphic and we're like, oh, look, identity graph. Do you think you can walk us through like what are we looking at here? Like what is an identity graph, and what sorts of graphing algorithms are you referring to?
Yeah, identity graphs are interesting, and we've been talking about them for years. This is something that we were using when we were a startup. It's something that we use today at Duo, which is how do I understand if I have thousands of users and each of those users has a handful of devices. Just on my desk here, I have 3 devices that are associated with me, but people have many. They might have 5 or 10 devices, and for all those users and devices, what applications am I allowed to access, what resources, and then what data is behind those applications, and what permissions do I have that govern those things. You can imagine it in your head as kind of like, all right, I've got a node for Matt, and Matt has his 3 devices, and from those 3 devices, he can access these 100 applications. It starts to look like a graph. And so that's exactly what we build in terms of the data structure that's underneath. And the way that at least we do it is we discover that from many different sources. So we'll look across all the different IDPs as SSO systems. We'll look across the directories. We'll look across other sources. You can throw a CSV in there. You could throw an HR system data in there to form that graph of who has access to what, and then what are they doing with that access. And that second piece is really important because you can look at who has access to what and you can do some cool stuff based on that, but you can't really do threat detection. You can't really do posture management without knowing, all right, Matt has access to these 100 applications, but maybe he's only using 5 of them or 10 of them. Does he really need access to all of them? Or, hey, Matt usually accesses things from this device, but suddenly he's coming from that device, accessing a new application he hasn't touched in 60 days. Well, that looks kind of anomalous. So we see AI being applied to, first of all, structuring those graphs and doing things like deduplicating nodes because my dash admin account and my regular account might actually be the same person. So that's an important thing to know. And AI can be really helpful with saying, hey, kind of fuzzy logic, which of these accounts are actually the same person, but then analyzing that graph to understand where are the anomalies. And it doesn't take generative AI really. That's helpful for things like looking at user principals and email addresses to say, hey, is this person really the same? But just looking at the graph data is kind of classic machine learning. It's like, where do we see unusual edges in that graph? Where do we see unusual access patterns in that graph to help analyze it? And at least our approach at Cisco Duo is a fairly deterministic approach to detecting anomalies. We don't want to just throw all this data into a black box. We really want to be able to analyze it based on deterministic rules that are easily explainable, because at the end of the day, it's a human who takes a look at these things and said, oh, that's unusual. Why is Matt's account, why is Kat's account flagged? We want to be able to explain exactly why it has been flagged so the person doing the investigation can then take action in order to remediate whatever problems were resulting in that person being flagged as an anomaly.
Yeah, I've got a question on like constructing identity graph. You mentioned earlier that when you're working with AI, you still need that human input into like, let's make the connections, let's add the integrations. You need to be aware of like where these identities are actually being stored. And sometimes when I see this graphic and we talk about identity, I'm like, oh, I never even considered, Slack is like its own identity source, and you got to like combine it with Workday. You got to combine it with all these other applications where that user is an instance and they might not be talking to any other parts of your like IDP, for example. Do you like when we're talking about like creating identity graph, do you have any like a list or a ranking of maybe like what are some of the areas that identities are stored that often get overlooked when you're trying to compile as much data?
Yeah, I think there's always the ones that are obvious. It'll be your SSO system, whether you're using Duo or Ping or Okta or Microsoft, whatever you might be using. That's kind of the obvious one. And your directory system, whether you're using Active Directory or something else. The ones that are less obvious is kind of what you're saying, Kat, which is things like Slack. Slack has its own kind of identity subsystem, and it allows you to invite external users into shared channels and things like that. GitHub is another good example where GitHub has its own permissions system inside of it, but you can also do things like collaborating with external collaborators in GitHub. And that's true of many different tools. And so being able to see that not just your employee identities, but kind of your extended workforce and who they're working with is really essential in order to get a full view of that identity attack surface. And sometimes that means making sure that their identities that are not inside that should be outside. And other sources other than SaaS applications might even be disconnected applications. So oftentimes we'll have islands of identity sitting on-prem. Cisco does a lot of work with companies who are hybrid. They have cloud presence, but they also have tons of on-prem presence. And there's all kinds of dark corners where identities hang out. You might have an old database or an old legacy application, which is still storing its own set of application or own set of users with their own passwords locally. And like that's just a treasure trove for an attacker that you need to be aware of. So uncovering all of those sources is essential to building a full and accurate identity graph.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of like external users or like the need to bring in contractors or third parties and these like complex supply chains, all of that can probably lead to a few blind spots in addition to like the shadow IT we house internally. And so once you create this identity graph, now I want to move into kind of how we've been using AI or big data in within our products, specifically in CII. We have this view called the user 360 view that zooms into like a specific user, their accounts, their auth factors. You mentioned like application permissions, how many times they logged in, activity flow, and also interesting information like the security checks they're failing. But recently, we added kind of a new module or like a new feature called user trust level. Do you think you can talk us through what the goal of user trust levels are and how it's determined?
Yeah, of course. This goes back to kind of the usability and the ability to do posture management and threat detection at scale, which is difficult if for every single user you're seeing like 10 to 20 different detections firing. We need a way to kind of level this up and show the IAM team or the security team, hey, who are the 5 to 10 users who I should be most worried about right now, this week, this morning, whatever the granularity is that you want to take a look at it. So we're using AI and kind of a weighted machine learning model in order to, for every single user, look at the different risk signals on their account and whether that's coming from, again, from Duo, from other third-party identity sources. Take all that together, correlate it on the same user, and then apply this AI model to it in order to determine a trust level. So the whole idea here with trust levels is that we can understand which users pose the greatest risk to the organization. Some users might be trusted, but some might be untrusted or questionable or suspicious or any layer in between there. And what we usually recommend for customers as they look at this is start with the untrusted users. They're at the lowest level of trust right now. And usually when you take a look at those are accounts where you need to lock them out and take some kind of action to clean them up. It's almost like a laptop getting infected with malware where it's like, yeah, there's no path forward here other than to wipe it and then restart. Sometimes accounts get to that level where they've been so corrupted and taken over that you need to expunge them entirely from the system and start again, or at the very least send them through like a password reset and kind of clear all their factors and almost take them through enrollment all over again. So the nice thing about trust levels is we get exactly that. We can see exactly which users are exhibiting kind of normal or usual behavior. And we can see which users have crossed the threshold in terms of unusual behavior. And we'll look at factors including their inherent risk, which is, who are they? Are they an admin or not an admin? We'll look at things like their posture, which is how is their account set up? Do they have MFA? Do they have strong assurance level for their MFA? And then we'll look at their behaviors. What are they doing? Are they coming from a new location, from a new device, accessing a new application? All of these things kind of factor together into this user trust level that changes over time. But if it drops below a certain level, it's really important that we take action on it. And then the other way that we use it is not just kind of logging in and looking at these things, but actually consuming that. And that's an API that we also offer for third-party integrations is, hey, let me take that trust level and let me action it as part of access. If my trust level is suspicious, maybe I need to go through a stronger form of authentication. Or maybe if my access user level is untrusted, maybe I shouldn't be allowed to get on the VPN or have access to certain applications. And so we're starting to see the adoption of that trust level across the board for just gaining more intelligence about the context for the user who's trying to access something. Just because somebody's successfully authenticated That's good, but it's not everything. Their account might be compromised, and so we need to know that, hey, they successfully authenticated, but it looks like their account might be taken over. So therefore, don't let them access the app.
Yeah, it sounds like with AI, it's really or one of the ways we use it for user trust levels is it's really about like processing all of those data and the raw inputs and turning it into like not a verdict, but like something to highlight, something that's easily comprehensible and something that you can potentially report on too. You know, like how many checks are we failing, or like how many unquestionable users did we move to trusted, and that kind of brings us to our last topic here about usable security. And I think that usable security as a topic, or like usability and frustrating experiences, is kind of twofold. First, it's on the administrator and the deployment process, the day-to-day management, overseeing all the risks, or like responding to the things that get highlighted by potentially like data driven AI models, or the different tools, but then also usability on the end user side. And in fact, this is kind of where we hear an argument for like vendor consolidation is like, I don't want my user to have to use a bajillion tools, because the way I think of it is like the best security, or the only security, is security that's actually used and adopted. Um, and that kind of brings us to like what the challenge of a frustrating user experience in the realm of identity security specifically, where we're seeing that having too many authentication requests disrupts productivity, and it increases resistance, and it also encourages them to find workarounds. Like, oh, let me download this Chrome extension that automatically accepts the push, or I'm just going to have it call me over telephone, so I can just like mash the button. And this really increases that resistance from users, and the important users, our VIPs, to adopt like strong authentication widely. Which brings us to one of the ways that we've been thinking of addressing this, and that is in terms of like decreasing the total number of logins, like decreasing the user friction. And you mentioned several times that at Cisco Duo, we really think about like the user experience, and making sure that the product can be is easily adopted, because it makes people's lives easier. And when we released dual passport, which for the audience is like our true SSO, you have one authentication that carries through, and minimizes that like authentication fatigue. But at the same time, and then in the lower row of this slide, you can see like behind the scenes, although the user is moving like from their desktop to browser A to browser B to their Outlook thick client to their VPN, and there's no re-authentication, in the background, there's still a constant like check for risks or changes in behavior, again, adding context to each of those logins. And I think that the release of Passport and the integration of CII and all the talk about like big data, that really is moving us towards this vision or this story of continuous identity security, which I think it has been a topic a few times. But I wanted to ask you, Matt, why is this constant checking important, or like how does that contribute to Cisco's vision for like what continuous identity security looks like in a realistic practice?
Yeah, we've been making gradual steps towards continuous identity security, and it's getting better and better over time. I think one part of it, just to go back to the user trust level, there's kind of an inverse to, hey, you're untrusted, therefore let's block you. The other might be, hey, you're clearly trusted, like your account and everything about it seems to be squeaky clean, like let's just get you through as quickly as possible because we know that this account is not compromised and we can trust it. So there's a lot we can do there. But the thing that really makes this continuous identity security is this passport capability, where once I log into a device once, I shouldn't have to log in again. So you talk about kind of frictionless user experience. Like that's exactly what we want to try to achieve, is like, hey, once I log into the operating system, I've already established that it's me sitting in front of my laptop. So why should I have to prove that over and over again? Instead, we know that this device is trusted as long as that operating system session is active and you don't log out, or you don't step away for too long from the system. That trust in the device can be preserved, and any subsequent authentication, whether that's through a browser or through a thick client or through a VPN application, whatever it is, can just rely on the trust in that device. And that's exactly what Passport does. Is it uses this internal communication between the browser and Passport, or between your thick client like your email or your VPN client and Passport, in order to say, like, no, Matt's still logged into the device and I can prove it. And we're able to then avoid subsequent authentication checks while still maintaining the same or higher level of security efficacy. So it's pretty powerful, and it's something that we've rolled out here at Cisco to great effect, where we log in once and then throughout the day you're not really challenged again, but in the background we're continuously looking at, and every time assessing, all right, is this still Matt logged in? Is his account still healthy? Has anything changed? Has the laptop suddenly changed locations? We're looking at all those things continuously. So if something does change, if a risk signal does fire, we're able to then quickly re-authenticate the user and get them on with their day. But we have that option to don't authenticate them at all or continue to authenticate them.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up the fact that we use it at Cisco, because I remember a few months ago I was sitting there, I was like, I really haven't been authenticating that often. I rarely need to take my phone out to do Duo. I'm just tapping my Touch ID, if at all. And so I was doing some digging. I was like, oh yeah, like we actually rolled out a lot of these things internally. And then I was like reaching out to some of our IT folks, and I was like, how did we do it? Like, what was that rollout process like? And so our lead architect for like rolling out Duo internally, like Sarbjeet, was like, yeah, like we actually are down to only 450,000 logins per week, which is crazy for going from 8 million for like an enterprise the size of Cisco. And obviously this wasn't a process that happened immediately. I think the Duo passwordless and risk-based authentication rollouts, which I would say like Passport kind of evolved from. That started back in October of 2021 with like a small pilot, fully rolled out in August of 2023. But now, like a year, 2 years from now, like we've got 118,000 users, or like 96% of the workforce enrolled in passwordless. Over 94% of our like active SSO users use passwordless at least once. And this is an all-time high, but 76 of all the authentications that happened last month were passwordless, growing from only 20% in September of 2023. So I think it's incredible. Just like we know there's a lot of barriers with like passwordless adoption. It can be kind of a tough technology to adopt, or it might seem a bit insurmountable. But I think like the approach that we took at Cisco was really interesting, where we started with no SSO at all. That's the 8 million logins. Then we condensed down to three IDPs, or SSO across the three IDPs. That significantly brought us down to 2.9. Then when we moved to like passwordless and RBA, we got down to like 650,000 logins per week, like 2.2 million logins. Decreased just because of like risk-based remembered devices and authentication. And then finally, with that rollout of Duo Passport, getting all the way down to 450,000 logins per week only. You must have been involved in that rollout to some degree, informed or like an advisor. Were there any feedbacks or learnings that you learned or shared throughout this like complete passwordless initiative that we rolled out with Cisco IT?
So this has been an incredible effort, and honestly, I can hardly take any credit for it. A lot of it goes to the folks in the IT and the security team at Cisco. But if you do the math on this, like 450,000 logins per week with 118,000 employees, it's about once a day. Assuming not everybody's logging in every day, but it's pretty remarkable from where we came from. And not only that, like as you were talking, Kat, I realized like I don't think I can remember my password now. It's like I haven't actually used it
I got locked out.
In such a long time that it's the benefit to that is like if I get phished, like if I somehow wind up on like a phishing site that looks like Cisco's login page, I don't even know what I would put in there, because I can't even remember what my password would be. And I know we have them behind the scenes in some cases, but this kind of sea change from kind of password based with a few different IDPs to getting everything behind a single authentication layer with Duo that is fully passwordless And even some applications that won't even allow you to log in anymore unless you choose the passwordless route. It's just been like transformational. So I've been somewhat involved. We continue to meet regularly with our IT and security counterparts on that side of Cisco to make sure that we're removing roadblocks and continuing to make it possible for them to fully transition away from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things, and continuing to enable better and better security for our end users. But yeah, it's been pretty remarkable how that collaboration has worked, and it's something where I've talked to many customers, and it seems so daunting to go passwordless. It seems like this huge hill, and it's almost like we found an easy button for it. And yeah, it took a couple years, and it takes lots of kind of internal preparation to do it. But knowing that there is a nirvana there that you can hit and that everybody can enjoy, and Cisco has actually gotten there as a Fortune 100 company, means that I think anybody can do it. It's just a matter of choosing the right tools and choosing the right rollout or deployment plan to get there.
Yeah, yeah. And I was gonna ask about like if you've heard any good anecdotes from end users about like the rollout of passwordless, and then but yeah, I literally got locked out of my account because I couldn't remember my password because I had not entered it in so long. So
Yeah, I think
shout out to
we're,
my
we're,
for
we're
helping
driving
me.
some of the executive assistants crazy at
Mhm.
Cisco because they can no longer share passwords their with their executives, which is good and bad, right? So they need to do that for their work. But we wound up finding that, hey, a lot of the work happens here because there's a bit of credential sharing going on, and we were able to lock that down and provide a more
Mhm.
mediated way to do it. So we can now see, hey, if somebody's logging in to approve travel expenses, for example, we know it's actually the executive assistant instead of the executive doing that. So we've gotten a lot better visibility. Like when you go look at identity intelligence now, you can see the difference between those people. Whereas before, it looked like the executive was logging into the travel expense system when it was in fact their executive assistant. So we've gotten more secure as a result, and we've reduced the amount of credential sharing as a side effect of going to passwordless.
Yeah, well, that I mean, I think that's a great way to end off like our three trends. There are still a lot of challenges that are happening in identity security, but it does sound like new technologies are evolving, or new processes, or like the ability to process more data is really making that seem more feasible, or like seem we're seeing the light, which is pretty cool. And now that I feel like we are thinking about like what could be and what should be protected moving forward in the security landscape. And I know that we've got enough time to take a forward look and maybe a little sneak peek at what we're working on and thinking about behind the scenes in advance of Identiverse. And one of the first topics that I wanted to talk about goes back to that Talos report, which, by the way, y'all should totally check out. Is a fantastic report, did in collaboration with Cisco Duo. But I think that the Talos researchers are incredible. That's just me being a fangirl. But one of the results that they saw was that MFA attackers actually go straight for the IAM applications, and they're the most frequently targeted in these MFA attacks. And I think that makes sense because when you have access to the IAM, or when you are able to get into that, it allows the attacker to kind of escalate their privileges, move laterally, get those permissions that are necessary. And so my question, Matt, is how do you think the industry can address some of these, like the risks of, or prevent like the risks of attackers getting these getting into the IAM, like the identity storages, and are there ways to improve the overall like security of the system?
Yeah, there are, and you're right. Like a lot of attackers will go straight to, hey, let me go look up on LinkedIn who's going to be a super admin. Let me go find people who are, certified on Okta or Microsoft or Duo even, and those are the people I'm going to go target with my social engineering. Or I'm going to find somebody's account who I know I can take over, and then use the fact that I have access to their email inbox in order to go and socially engineer the actual super admin in the organization. And once I'm there, I can then log in to that IDP and then start setting up federation with my own IDP, start changing permissions and giving me access to whatever it is that I'm trying to get access to within an organization. So that's kind of the reality, and attackers are doing that because that's the weakest link, and that gives them the most privileges the most quickly in a modern enterprise. The approach, I think, we need to evolve. A lot of these IDPs and these IAM systems need to kind of evolve into more of a security first mindset and make sure that we're secure by default. And I think we're going to see that over the next few years. And there's been a lot of work around it, but getting to a point where we have a security first mindset and identity is really essential, either both for the vendors who are building these systems, but also for the teams that are deploying them and how they think about controlling admin access and who has access to do what.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties well into another area that we're thinking about, which is like the evolution of MFA and phishing resistance, or even just the evolution of attack methods that are happening in the like specifically like MFA targeting attacks. It always feels like it's been this game of tug of war between like the defender technology and the novel attack methods. Like we've got password cracking, and then we have MFA, and then password spraying, and then bypass, and I think that goes back to our original or like an earlier slide where we talked about how the gaps in MFA might not be like, oh, you don't have MFA. It could just be like, oh, you don't have a strong MFA. Maybe it's like a text message, or it's like a telephony. And I think like at Cisco, we're thinking about patching these gaps in between and like offering that more holistic coverage. And in a sense, being able to provide phishing resistant MFA or like phishing resistance in general across all of these use cases. But at the same time, like while MFA gaps are a challenge, identity security is probably more than just MFA. Like it also includes, we mentioned like device trust. In the year in view again, download the year in view. It's so good. The easy access was a really dominant theme that had like it basically said, oh, like these decades old vulnerabilities are still being compromised by threat actors, or like these are like vulnerabilities in IT systems because they're not patching and they're not upgrading from these older systems. And so like we've got MFA as a layer, and then device trust as a layer. And then you also said, or we also talked today about like the context, identity context, having that information across all of these, the edge cases, the external users. So how do you envision phishing resistance as a whole becoming more accessible? Like what kind of challenges do we see right now during implementation, and like what are ways that we could potentially, overcome some of those challenges and make that phishing resistant future like a reality across all of these use cases?
Yeah, and it kind of has been sort of an arms race. We went from no MFA to push-based MFA, and then verified push, and biometric backed push, and it has been. I do think that this concept of assurance levels and kind of phishing
Mm-hmm.
resistant as the gold standard makes a ton of sense. It's just a question of like, how do you get there? The only real way to get there today is deploying a bunch of hardware tokens, and like that can be a nightmare for its own reasons. It's got a lot of benefits, but operationally it's difficult. I think what you're going to see in the near future, and I would say like stay tuned to the audience on this, is a much easier way to achieve phishing resistant, provably phishing resistant authentication without needing the need for hardware tokens. So stay tuned on that one.
Yeah. All right. And oh, we only have 12 minutes left. So I'm going to zoom to the last thing that I want to talk about, which is kind of based off of a white paper that we put out a bit ago around like building, how to build an identity security program. And we kind of based that off of the NIST like core frameworks of, identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and remediating. Throughout the timeline of a phishing attack or an MFA targeting attack or like some of these more advanced identity attacks, but one of the things that we pointed out in our research and our white paper and our conversations with customers is that one of the challenges is actually communicating some of the data or communicating the findings between the SOC teams and the IT teams. And we talk about like the security divide, the security IAM divide between like who owns identity security? Is that the security team? Is that SOC? Is that IT? How do you see organizations potentially bridging that divide? And do we see any tools or like techniques to better foster the communication collaboration between IT and SOC in order to enhance and like unify against like identity attacks.
Yeah, I think for a long time the SOC didn't really have a lot of identity signals coming into it. That's changed now with identity threat detection. So I think that's really built a bridge. I guess let me first take a step back and like identity security is everybody's responsibility. We all have responsibility for recognizing phishing and social engineering, and we all need to remain vigilant. And we all need to be training our organizations and the people in them to look out for those things and not kind of fall victim to a well-crafted spear phishing attempt. So that's number one. But I do think there is a way to bridge IT and security and the SOC when it comes to identity. Historically, they've been different teams. What we're seeing more and more in some organizations is that the IAM team, or at least the IAM architect, is moving over under security to create more alignment between identity and security. And then tools. We built this identity intelligence tool, Cisco Identity Intelligence, and I like to call it the sort of lingua franca of identity because I can have a page that maybe the identity team has identified for a user, and it looks like the account is compromised, and they can take that link and then share that over with the SOC or the security team, where they can open a ticket and put it in there. The security team can bring it right up. We don't need to allow them to log into the identity tools. They can just log into the identity intelligence dashboard and then look at that user and investigate them and see what's going on there. So having kind of, at least we're reading off the same sheet of music is an important prerequisite to getting alignment between IT and security.
Yeah, I think that really ties together some of the themes that we've been hearing or like that we talked about today, where it's like we have a lot of data and we have a lot of like gaps and things we need to protect, but like one benefit of AI is being able to communicate that more easily between the teams and also make that act of detecting, protecting, responding much more like seamless between the teams and between all of these different stakeholders that need to work together in order to really defend against this like highly pervasive issue. And so that brings us to the last slide of today's conversation. But last question before we go to Q&A. What, Matt, like where do you see, we've covered so much ground. There's a lot of identity adjacent products at Cisco, Duo, CII, ICE. Like where do you see us going in the context of like Cisco's greater security portfolio? Like how are we thinking about like ways our products can work together and like actually make a difference?
Yeah, so I do think that, and some of this is like we're actually actively driving this. Is identity is a foundational part of security. It's just as important as network security. It's just as important as endpoint security. Identity security is a core pillar, and it infects everything. In order to do good network security and good endpoint security, good application security, you can't do any of that. You can't do zero trust networking without a really strong identity foundation. And there's a big realization of that at Cisco. And so we're heavily investing in identity, both in terms of how we secure human identities, but also machine, workload, agentic identity is a big topic right now. And so all of these are areas that we are pushing the envelope on from an innovation perspective. And I'm really excited for some of the things that we're going to be announcing just ahead of Identiverse, but I will hold my tongue on that one. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves.
We got a few weeks to go, a few months to go. So, so thank you so much for like the teaser and all of these like your insights. We did get one question come into Q&A from Benjamin, which is like, what are the differences between passkey and an identity passport?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very prescient question to realize that there is a connection there. So today, Duo is not a passkey provider. Maybe down the road, but today we rely on passkeys mainly as an authentication factor, and you can register your passkeys and use them wherever you see a Duo prompt. But keep an eye out for what we do in passkeys in the near future as well. That's a good question.
Great. Well, with a few minutes to spare, I wanted to close off this session today by saying, come talk to us at booth 510 at Identiverse. A lot of our leaders will be there. We'll be having if you enjoyed the conversations from today or if you had any additional questions, we are super excited to have 5 sessions at Identiverse as well. So, Matt, you've got one on Thursday morning, I believe, a keynote.
Yep.
But in addition to keynote, we've also got a few specialty sessions. If the particular question about passkeys, we've got a session on passkeys by Matt Miller on Friday, and we've got a masterclass on Wednesday. We would love to see you all at Identiverse. We hope you're as excited there as we are. But and if you want to see the year in review, the link is right there. We've got also some of the resources that were referenced throughout this session. And now that's it from me. Matt, any final parting words?
No, thanks for tuning in. Look forward to seeing everybody at Identiverse. Please stop by the booth, and if you see me in the halls, feel free to stop me and say hello.
Yeah, well, appreciate everyone's time today. This is a fantastic conversation. Thanks for your time too, Matt. And we hope to see everyone at Identiverse.